Good morning, Bimblers, and you join me here in Northwich for Northwich 2, as promised. Although I did say in Northwich 1 we would be visiting the mock Tudor houses of Northwich, which we're not doing today. We're having a look at this, the Weaver Navigation, and we're having another look at the Trent and Mersey. So let's stop messing about and let's bimble. This is the Barnton Tunnel, and it's here on the Trent and Mersey Canal. The Trent and Mersey Canal links the River Trent in Staffordshire to my beloved River Mersey in Cheshire. And it was all built by James Brindley, friend of the channel. I believe there's 4 tunnels on the Trent and Mersey Canal, and they were all open and operational by 1777. James Brindley had a grand idea for something he called his Grand Cross. That was a way of linking all the major rivers of England together, therefore linking all the major cities of England together. He would link the River Trent to the River Severn, and the River Severn to the River Thames, and the River Thames to the River Mersey, and all those rivers to the River Humber. So you basically link Cardiff, London, Birmingham, Liverpool and Hull. It was a giant feat of engineering to link the River Trent to the River Mersey, and they had to dig this great big tunnel that's about 500 metres long. Back in the olden days, your barge would have been pulled by a horse, and you would have had to have took the horse off the barge and have someone take it over the hill while you legged your barge down the tunnel. Legging your barge means that you lie on top of the barge and walk your legs along the walls of the tunnel, getting your barge to the other side, where you'd meet back up with your horses. I say they had to go down this tunnel, and they had to build this tunnel to link the Trent to the Mersey. There was another way to get in the River Mersey here in Northwich. Let's bimble. This is Saltersford Lock, here on the Weaver Navigation. And it's called Saltersford Lock because there used to be a shallow section here in the River Weaver that would allow you to get over with your horse and cart. And most of the horses and carts that went over the River Weaver were owned by the salters. The salters being the men that dug up the salt, that got the salt out of the salt springs and sold it all around the country. For those who have watched my Northwich 1 video, you'll know all about that. But for those who haven't, I'll explain. In the early Triassic period, before the tectonic plate shifted, before the Jurassic period with the T-Rex and the Triceratops, all the land around the River Mersey was a desert right by the equator. That's why there's so much sandstone around Cheshire and Liverpool and the northwest of England, because of that desert. But at the side of the desert was a big salty sea, and the blazing hot desert sun evaporated the water out of that sea bit by bit, and sand from the desert blew in, and you got salt and you got sand, and eventually it formed rock salt. And that's what most of Cheshire is built on top of, especially here in Northwich and Middlewich and Nantwich and Sandbach. They're all built on old salt beds. In the 1700s, that salt became big business. We think about salt as being something that you just put on top of your chips, but it's actually the basis of many industrial and chemical processes. They used to take the salt from Cheshire, put it on the big Mersey flats, and take it to St Helens, where they would make glass, and they would take the same Mersey flats over to Widnes, Runcorn and Warrington, where they would make bleach out of it. Salt is sodium chloride, so it's got chlorine in it, which is how you make bleach. It would also be taken down the River Mersey into Manchester or Cottonopolis, where it would be sent to the mills to soften the cotton. It would also be used to make the dyes that dyed the cotton. Not only did they send it to places around the northwest of the UK, but they sent it all around the world. They put it on the same Mersey flats and take it into Liverpool and load it onto big ships and take it to all far-flung places around the world. In fact, one of the last buyers of salt from Northwich, from the Lion Salt Works, was Nigeria. If you've watched Northwich 1, you'll remember I visited the Lion Salt Works, and whilst I was filming, I went and had a quick Diet Coke in the Salt Barge pub just opposite the museum, and a gentleman was telling me that the Nigerians insisted that the salt was wrapped up in cotton, even up until the 1980s. By then, most companies were wrapping things like that in paper or plastic, but the Nigerians insisted that it was cotton, and that was because they used to make clothes out of the sacks. So if you went to Nigeria today, you might see someone's granddad wearing a t-shirt that he made out of a Lion Salt Works sack. That seems like a granddad kind of thing to do, wear a t-shirt from the 1980s. But anyway, the reason why they built the Weaver Navigation was so that they could get that salt out into the world. Let's bimble.
Washed in clean by a riverside. They told you the news. Kept so cold in the blackest tide. If only you knew. I've heard what they've said, ignored what I read, and looked to the bright side. So here's to the bad times, forgotten in good lights. I won't let you down. I won't let you down. what you know to be true.
There's quite a few of these rather smart looking swing bridges here in Northwich. This is Acton Swing Bridge, and it's one of three. This one was built in 1933, and the first time it swung round was on the 10th of August of that year. It was based on a design from 1893 that was made by a John Arthur Sainer. He learnt how to do his engineering from the Hull Dock Company, and at the grand old age of 21 he was hired as an engineer by the Weaver Navigation trustees, and when he was 29, an old fella, he designed these swing bridges. You might be thinking to yourself, well, where's the big design? They look very similar to the swing bridges on the Manchester Ship Canal, and on the outside they do, but these swing bridges are designed around a problem. Back in the 1700s, when they started digging for all that salt, they didn't really think about the health and safety aspects of mining for the salt. They used to dig for it, dig big holes in the ground, and they didn't really care what happened to the ground up above. We spoke about that in Northwich 1, and we visited one of the flashes. That's where the ground falls in and fills up with rainwater and forms a lake. You have the same thing in Lancashire, with Pennington Flash, which we've Bimble to again. Pennington Flash was formed from mining for coal, where all the flashes here in Cheshire are formed from mining for salt. All that mining under the ground meant that lots of buildings in Northwich fell towards the centre of the earth, and that might have been the same fate for the bridges. So these bridges actually float in the middle on water. So if the ground underneath the bridge sinks, the bridge will stay level because it's resting on top of the water. Very clever stuff. It's the same design as the Hayhurst Swing Bridge and the Town Centre Swing Bridge in Northwich. But it wasn't just bridges that John Arthur Sainer designed. He also electrified the Anderton boat lift, which is where we started today's Bimble. And he also built Hale Head Lighthouse, which we've Bimbled to in the past. And I think in our next Trans-Pennine Bimble, we shall pass it, and we'll have to go and stop at Hale Head Lighthouse and name check John Arthur Sainer. He's a right clever clogs. Let's Bimble.
Dim lit scenes of a better life, spoken in loud tones to you. Well, I've heard what they've said, ignored what I read, and looked to the bright side. So here's to the bad times forgotten in good lives. I won't let you down. I won't let you down. I'll take off my shoes and dance to the good news. Broken smiles, but they will turn it round. Smiles, but they will turn it round. So take off your shoes and dance to the good news. Take off your shoes and dance to the good news.
The Weaver Navigation was conceived in 1720 via an Act of Parliament. That's the same year that you get the Mersey and Irwell Navigation Act. And the two Acts of Parliament are basically the same. All they say is that you're allowed to do whatever you like to the rivers, and you don't have to consult Parliament about it. Basically, leave us alone and make us some money. There's one stipulation that's different in the Weaver Navigation Act in regards to the Mersey and Irwell Navigation Act. All of the profits from the Weaver Navigation have to be given to Cheshire County Council for them to update the roads. And that's how Northwich gets its state-of-the-art floating black and white swing bridges. The navigation was completed in 1732 and it cost around £16,000, which is about 3 million in today's money. But it was built with 11 locks, so it's actually not too bad. They dredged the river so it was deeper to get the Mersey flats down with all the salt. And they cut off giant loops of the river. In fact, most of the loops are still in place. Where there's an original loop, there's usually a sluice gate, and where they put the new cut, there's usually a lock. It's basically the same idea as the Manchester Ship Canal. In fact, in 1856, a man named Edward Leader Williams updated the Weaver navigation, and he changed the 11 locks for 5 big locks, like you see today here at Dutton Locks. And they're very similar in design to the Manchester Ship Canal locks. That's because Edward Leader Williams was the chief engineer of the Manchester Ship Canal. So a lot of the ideas that he got for the Weaver navigation went into the Manchester Ship Canal. The Weaver navigation and the River Weaver both flow into the Manchester Ship Canal now, both in actuality and in concept. But what killed the canals? Well, there's evidence of that down the road. Let's bimble.
So here's to the bad times, forgotten in good lives. I will let you down. I'll take off my shoes and dance to the good news. Broken smiles, but they won't turn it round. So take off your shoes and dance to the good news. Take off your shoes and dance to the good news. Take off your shoes and dance to the good news.
This is the Dutton Viaduct, and it takes the West Coast Main Line between Crewe and Warrington. It was built in 1836 for a cost of £54,000 approximately. That's about £4.7 million in today's money. And it was all paid for by the Grand Junction Railway. 2 men designed it. A Joseph Locke, he's a very famous railway engineer, and he was an employee, a friend of the channel, George Stephenson. He designed this viaduct. It's been a star-studded bimble today. It's like the greatest hits of all the weird Victorians that I talk about all the time. They all seem to have converged onto Northwich to build little bits of industrial architecture. We've also mentioned the contractors that built the viaduct, William Mackenzie. It was him and a Thomas Brassey that built the Carlisle Bridge in Lancaster that we visited in my pilling bimble. In fact, Thomas Brassey went up for this contract, but he quoted them £5,000 more. So they decided to go with William Mackenzie. Some of the considerations in the design of this viaduct were the same as the considerations for the Sankey Viaduct that George Stephenson also built. In fact, they're quite similar. They both had to fit Mersey flats underneath. Mersey flats aren't as flat as the name suggests. That's because they had tall masts and sails on them. Unlike the barges on the Trent and Mersey Canal, they weren't horse-drawn, they were wind-powered. So they had to build the viaduct very tall to accommodate them. In fact, it's 18 metres tall, and it has 20 spans. And it was considered to be George Stephenson's greatest achievement at the time. Not just because of its size, but because apparently no one was injured or died during the building of it, which was a very uncommon occurrence at the time. The working man was seen as being a bit disposable. They expected a few of them to die building things like this. It's built from red sandstone, the same sandstone that came from the desert. That's the reason why there's so much salt in Northwich, which is the reason why they needed to make the Weaver navigation, and the reason why they needed to make such a tall bridge to go over it, out of the sandstone from the desert. It's a rich tapestry.